Welcome to the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast.
Welcome to our first monthly special of Season 2. In today's episode, I am talking to Anna Smith-Spark, a fantasy author who has often been referred to as the Queen of Grimdark. We discuss her lyrical writing, themes of motherhood, and the importance of folklore in modern fiction. This conversation was recorded at the World Fantasy Convention over Halloween weekend, so there may be a little bit of hustle and bustle in the background. I hope you enjoy listening along. Okay, so we are here at World Fantasy Con 2025 in Brighton. We have just finished setting up, so I'm a little bit all over the place, but we've got all of our books here, lots of activities. We're already planning on having a lot of fun. And we've just got Anna Smith-Spark to join us at our table. So, hi Anna.
Hi.
I'll just do a quick introduction and then you can sort of introduce yourself, probably better than I will. But you're an author who has written many books, but two with Flame Tree, which are A Sword of Bronze and Ashes and A Sword of Golden Ruin, which just came out last month, September.
Yes.
And we've done really pretty special editions of them, and we've got some fun merch that we're giving away at the convention this weekend. But yeah, you've been called the Queen of Grimdark, and you write lyrical fantasy, and you came up with the theme for the convention this year, or
I was part of the team that came up with the theme for the convention. Yes,
So,
yes.
do you want to introduce yourself better than I did?
Yes, Anna Smith-Spark. Yes, I am the author of the Empires of Dust series, which is like big, epic, grimdark fantasy. So big, kind of multi-points of view, continent spanning, huge battles, dragons, sort of flashbacks to long eons ago kind of fantasy. And then from that, I then wrote a novel called The Woman of the Sword, which is very much about an individual woman dealing with living in that world and that kind of being a normal, average person caught up in those kind of vast cataclysmic events, which was a very kind of confessional book about the kind of difficulties and unpleasantnesses of being a parent and particularly a mother in a kind of fairly kind of toxic, violent, masculine, war-driven world. And then from that, I then wrote the series I have with Flame Tree, A Sword of Bronze and Ashes, and its sequel, The Sword of Golden Ruin, which were kind of consciously written to be about, a woman who is a mother, a woman much more consciously more positive. She's much more written as me, as I would aspire to be. She's based on sort of people I know who I particularly admire, women, mothers who I particularly admire. And the whole sense of the books came from originally just sort of thinking about this person and creating her in a world. And so the first book, A Sword of Bronze and Ashes, opens with her walking down through beautiful lush wet grass to go and bring in her cows in the morning for milking, to get the milk for her children. And that sense of sort of lushness and beauty, and then obviously something terrible happens, but that sense of sort of lushness and beauty and richness and that sense of the countryside and the kind of wonderful positives of a fantasy, the kind of fantasy worlds that we create, as in people living in a kind of pastoral world, people living in a pre-modern world, people being much more grounded in nature, all just came out in the writing. It wasn't, I didn't think, I'm going to write a book that's in a different cadence to the stuff I'd written before, but previous books were written in a kind of very masculine way. Was Sword of Bronze and Ashes and A Sword of Golden Ruin, which are absolutely my favourite of my books, actually. I mean, obviously I love Empires of Dust. It was, my first book series. I will always love Marith, but these books, I just think they are so beautiful. I just think my prose has got really so much better. I think they are. I'm really, really, really proud of them, and I'm just really, really proud of what Flame Tree have done to them. They're just exquisite what they've done, the way they publish them. But yeah, they're much more kind of positive and hopeful. Very, very raw still, but yes, I think much more beautiful. Which actually, that wasn't me introducing myself at all. That was me going on and on about my books.
That's all right. No, that's perfect, because it's leading on to three big areas of your books.
Yes.
So there's the lyrical fantasy element, and then there's the motherhood, and then there's the more like what you were saying about the countryside and folkloric part. So I don't know which one to start with. Okay, lyrical fantasy. What does that mean to you? What drew you to writing in that way? And yeah, what's your experience with it?
It means to me that kind of it's really for me what the heart of what fantasy is. So fantasy is creating other worlds. It's creating things that are beautiful and wonderful and terrifying. It's sort of trying to describe. Empire. The first thing I ever wrote, Empires of Dust, the first what's now chapter 2, which was the first piece of fiction I wrote as an adult, is a description of some people fighting a dragon. And that's like trying to find the words to actually describe what it would be like if you're sitting down for a lunch break. They're in a desert, they're in a fantasy world, but trying to describe a dragon, trying to describe what it would feel like to fight. And indeed, there is someone who's killed by a dragon, and so this is in the first 5 pages. So trying to describe that, put into words what that would feel like. That's why I've always loved fantasy and science fiction. It is those vistas of, and the romance of, and the beauty of other worlds and magic and wonder and strangeness. And that's what I've always found in the great myths of the world and folklore. That sense of strangeness and weirdness and beauty, and using language to describe that. Some people say, my books are very, they haven't got much plot, or they've got very simple plots. Well, yes, they do, because it's not about that. I'm not interested in the kind of really twisty kind of plot devices or the kind of solving the puzzle. I'm interested in creating
something immersive.
Wonderful world. Yes, immersive, wonderful worlds. I'm interested in creating just that beauty and wonder and amazing experience of something strange, something different, of taking people beyond mundane reality. For me, that is lyrical fantasy. It's that sense of fantasy as poetry, and of kind of using language to describe things that are beautiful, and whether that's beautiful in really positive ways, like when Tolkien's describing Rivendell, or when he's describing, obviously that kind of, when they go to Rivendell, finally they're finally safe in Rivendell after being their first sort of horrible experience being chased by the Black Riders, or whether kind of when later when they go to Lothlorien, and obviously that's supposed to be this kind of incredible, beautiful, astonishing place, and he's describing wonders. So whether it's that kind of really beautiful elves, angels, beautiful landscapes, or whether it's the kind of terrible beauty of fighting and being killed by a dragon, it's all of that is about that kind of wonder and beauty and romance, and that for me is absolutely kind of what lyrical fantasy is. It's the poetic and the strange and the wonderful and the enchanted and the magical. Yeah.
It gives you a chance to go in, because I guess people that read fantasy or are interested in it, you want to experience a completely different world, so that's the way to sort of be in there and feel it viscerally in all its ways.
Yes.
And then we were talking a bit before as well, because you've recently been to Butser Book Fest, which is a festival, whereabouts is it? It's sort of
Butch is in Hampshire. It's in the middle of nowhere in Hampshire. It's weirdly impossible to get to. It's not that far out of London, but it's in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, that's a kind of series of reconstructions of old houses. So it began, I won't say prehistoric, but some of them are technically historical period, but they have got a Neolithic shelter. So they've attempted to recreate a Neolithic shelter, a Mesolithic shelter, 2 Neolithic longhouses, a Bronze Age roundhouse, and several Iron Age roundhouses, a Roman villa, and 2 Anglo-Saxon mead halls. So again, I was there in a Neolithic longhouse, reading an account of people that I've written, actually, of people building a Neolithic longhouse that's in sort of golden ruin. And that, again, you're just in this place which is not of the modern world, and they're trying to sort of see how people would actually have lived, and looking at the kind of way people would have lived and behaved. And they have lots of reenactment events there, and they do lots of poetry and things events there, where people come and perform very old poetry and sort of read very, very old early Welsh poetry and things in these buildings, and play ancient musical instruments, and sort of attempts to reconstruct things like the carnax or the harp and things. And it's just,
that sounds very cool.
It's amazing.
Yeah, being in that environment by the fireplace with the rain coming down.
Yes,
it's got to be like you've been thrown into this medieval fantastical world. And
yes. I mean, I was reading By Firelight.
Yeah.
In this,
if anyone had a phone, you'd just be like, "What are you doing?"
Yes.
Hide it away.
Yes, it was absolutely incredible. Yeah, reading to firelight with the sound of the fire and the smell, and it was so special.
Yeah. Peak environment for your books.
So special. Yes.
But on to sort of more the motherhood aspect of the series. I suppose where that's come from, why you feel like you started with more male voices in your books and then wanted to go into this sort of softer, well, I don't know, it's not really soft in a way because it's, you know, a world in which violence does happen, but why did you go into that?
Just sort of happened, as I said. So yeah, I mean, fiction the stories I really love are very heavily male dominated. So I mean, I studied classics at university, which is very, very heavily male dominated texts. The Iliad, which is obviously very, very heavily male dominated, and then the Anabasis of Alexander, the Life of Alexander, which is even more heavily male dominated. And I mean, I absolutely love the Norse myths, the kind of the Irish sagas, the stories around Cuchulainn, I've always absolutely loved. And again, they are really quite heavily male dominated, and sort of folklore, those sort of great myth cycles, and then epic fantasy is, I mean, again, traditionally very, very male dominated. Tolkien is they sort of had to hugely increase the female roles in the film of the Lord of the Rings, because the Lord of the Rings really has no women in it. And so I kind of, when I was writing, it was really when I first started writing, it was really unconscious. I was really horrified to discover later that I was sort of going through and just realised that there's no reference to a woman.
I think you do have to consciously make that.
It is weird because you don't, because it just seemed very natural. I was writing, I just sort of started writing this thing. I wasn't thinking what I was doing, just started writing. And it was so I was writing a very male-dominated book because most of the books I'd read were very male-dominated. And if they do have female characters in them, they are often either the kind of the love interest, as in the Iliad, a lot of sort of more traditional myth story cycles and tellings of myth cycles, and then also a lot of more traditional fantasy. Or what you often have is women who are behaving very much like men. So you have, I mean, Steve Erikson has very, very kind of gender mixed, balanced books, but he's writing about soldiers. So there's lots of people who are in his armies, who fight it in the Bridge Burners and the Bone Hunters, but they are of all different genders and sexualities, but they are all soldiers. They're all behaving in very sort of soldierly ways.
It's sort of like I don't know, I'm not saying this for him, but some people will make a female character, but they're female only in the fact that they're female, that nothing about their experience is particularly
they
female.
are very much behaving just like the men, and in fact what you often get is there will often be references to, there's some reference somewhere to, they're all taking magic herbs that you take, these infallible herbs. You just drink this cup of herb tea every morning, and this is the most absolutely infallible contraceptive known to man. So we just get rid of the whole kind of issue around the fact that if you have biological cis women in a massive army, the chances are some of them are going to be pregnant and have children. You just get rid of that very early on
by saying
it's fine. Yeah, we can just, so basically you can kind of magic away some of the issues that have always still, are still an issue for cis women around the fact that they can get pregnant. So you can kind of magic away some sort of and not have to deal with any of that kind of element of writing about women, which I mean is fine, particularly kind of, but I guess I got really interested in the idea of it started off in a way from people talking about which character would you be in your books. And I'm sort of like, I'm a mum with kids who's got, no physical skills at all. Me and my kids would be one of the people who's, would be bulldozed when the army goes through our village, and I'd last 3 lines.
I would agree with that.
Yes. And that kind of, so what would it actually then be like to be that character? And that I got more and more interested at the end when I was writing the end of Empires of Dust, of writing about the minor peripheral characters we see who we just do get steamrolled, they're just bulldozed and die in a couple of lines, and what the experience of, or even more interestingly, the experience of the people who are just in the army. They're not the great generals, they're not the great leaders. So writing about that kind of, what would it be like to be not one of the special people, but one of the grunts in the army, or one this community which has been together for years, but its entire only basis is war. So which was where Woman of the Sword came from, because it came from this idea of women in war, but a kind of very negative reading of women in war. But then this idea of writing about a fantasy world in which a woman is utterly celebrated for her creative powers and her strength and her power, but also her power and strength as a mother, as trying to be patient, as trying to be a good, positive woman as a mother, and actually trying to write a world where that sense of her as a caring figure, as strong but kind of caring and thoughtful and constantly having to look out for the people around her, and having that, she's exhausted, she's fed up, she's frustrated by her caring responsibilities, because that's entirely natural. I have two children.
Doesn't need to be like she's the super mum.
She's not perfect. She's not a super mum, but kind of very traditionally, kind of in some ways traditionally female gendered. And I wanted to talk about that, talk about the fact that she's a mother, talk about her awareness of her body as a woman's body, and the fact that she has birthed children, and her relationship with her husband as her having a sense of herself as his equal, but also she does have this sense of, she's his wife. Has some kind of sense of gender differences between the two of them. And I wanted to write about that and kind of talk about that and that sort of sense of a world because the story is very much told in the third person, but it's told very much through her perspective. So to talk about that is something that she really values and that's really important, and that's the way she sees her world is very much in terms of her love for her children and her feelings of love and happiness about being a mother and being a wife and having a home and creating a family environment, not in a kind of trad wife way, but in a sort of awful kind of she's subservient to husband, but in a sense that this is her family, this is her community, and that being really important to her. And it was such a kind of joyful experience writing something like that after writing these endless books after writing these books that were just kind of very long and very, very kind of bleak. And to write, it was very, very joyful writing these books about her, and they do, her story gets more and more complicated, but to kind of, write about someone who I feel fundamentally is incredibly positive, kind of really strong character. Lots of people have said they just think she's just, someone the other day just sort of told me Kanza, the hero of Golden Ruin and Sword and Bronze Ashes, is the one that she's one of the most real, vivid women that they've read in a novel, because she is so positive.
You're not trying to put
but I'm not trying to put her on a pedestal. Yeah, no, she's not. She's perfectly aware she's not great. She's doing her best, and often her best isn't good enough. It's just, that's the way it is. And I really, she really, really, really is someone I really love, and it was so wonderful writing about her.
So now you have an answer to the question when people say which of
your
characters you related to.
Yes.
There's also the whole theme, which I want to go into, of folklore, Grimdark. You did an article in the Bookseller recently about reclaiming British folklore. You said you studied it at university. So, could you start also by describing Grimdark for anyone that doesn't know?
Grimdark it actually comes from, it was originally coined as a kind of very negative, not unpleasant, sort of in a bit rude term. It comes from the Warhammer 40k slogan, "In the grimdark future, there is only war." So it's the Warhammer 40k world where there is only war, where sort of you have the Imperium, and it is a military empire that is utterly dominated by its armies. It's like the Roman Empire in space. It's totally kind of centered around military control. And then it's constantly beset by enemies who are constantly trying to attack it. So it's very much about, it is a world in which there is only war, and the war is galaxy-wide. So that and everything is hostile. Because it comes to that sort of role-playing notion that if you encounter something, it is hostile. So if a wandering monster jumps out of you in D&D, the assumption is it is hostile. So that kind of notion, that sort of sense of being on kind of everything is out to get you. So Grimdark was that the term Grimdark was then applied to a series of novels, partly just because several books were published in the same year. So Mark Lawrence's Prince of Thorns and Abercrombie's work, and then Game of Thrones, all of which are very much big epic fantasy, but they're not about they haven't got that Tolkien sense of fundamentally we are on the side of good, and there is a very clear sense of evil which is genuinely evil and threatening, and good and we have the kind of the hero who is the great hero, and you're reading it hoping that they will win, and you are heavily invested in the good, and you know who the good are. Sort of something like in Game of Thrones, there is no good. There are different factions, and there are some you might prefer to others, but it's not good and evil. It is different competing factions, and often someone will do something that they think is good. So in the beginning of Game of Thrones, Ned Stark constantly talks about his honour, about truth, about the need for truth and honour, and that is in fact, his belief in truth and honour is what leads to the absolute cataclysm that leads to civil war devouring the entire Westeros. Yeah. And it's that kind of, there are really quite complicated consequences. It's never as simple as
do the right thing
and the right, yes, and sometimes you do, yes, sometimes consequences will be terrible, or the kind of, this sort of, again in Game of Thrones, the sort of, you have Robb Stark, and you're sort of, okay, so Robb Stark is clearly, he is the young chosen hero, and he is clearly going to kind of sweep in, and he will restore Westeros, and everything will be fine, and he'll be a much better king than the Baratheons, and then he just dies. And again, that sort of hero narrative has often ended in the past with the person just dying, and then everything gets worse. So that's where Grimdark comes from. It is a much more kind of cynical, complex, question things, think about things. If someone stands up and says, "I will make your country great again," maybe you might want to think carefully about that and what they're saying and what that means.
Mentioned.
Yes, it is very much kind of critiquing that hero. Yeah, I will make this kingdom great again.
Yeah,
and what that means.
What's going to happen now?
Yes, it's kind of pointing out that the White Knight, and I mean quite literally, the White Knight trope in fantasy is very problematic on any number of levels.
Yeah.
So that's where Grimdark comes from. The stuff I write is always filled with an awareness of that kind of interrogating that notion of male violence and the hero and power. Fantasy is ultimately hugely a genre about power. It is so often about, the roots of fantasy are in kings and magic users, warriors, magic users, people with power. So folklore and mythology is, I've always loved. So my earliest memories are of being read versions of the Mabinogion and the Irish sagas and the Norse myths and the Greek myths by my dad, and so I just grew up absorbing them. So that's something I've always engaged with. And then we used to spend a lot of time. We'd go on holiday, and we never went abroad. We went to places in Britain, usually either in Cornwall and Devon or in Suffolk. My friends had a house in Suffolk, and we spend a lot of time going for walks, going to look at churches or buildings, and going for a walk on sort of cliff paths and things, walking coast path. And my dad would tell me all the folklore. We'd talk a lot about the kind of folklore and the stories from around there. And I mean, in fact, my dad grew up in a town called Minehead, which is quite near Porlock. It was quite near where Coleridge was staying when he wrote Kubla Khan. So there's this whole thing about kind of you could walk the path that you could walk on the paths that Coleridge was walking, and you could walk basically what must have been the footpath that the person from Porlock took walking to Kubla Khan's to Coleridge's cottage to knock on the door and interrupt the writing of Kubla Khan. So again, that kind of sense of stories and myth and layers of sort of storytelling and poetry and local history and things that was just there in my childhood. So it just was sort of something I just sort of constantly kind of absorbed and grew up just thinking about and having around me.
So what does it mean to you to sort of reclaim it in a way in your writing, and why is it important that we do try and keep it within our traditions and our
it's kind of in
stories that we tell each other?
They are beautiful stories, and they are that connection. They are stories that are connected with particular places. So having that deep memory about those places, having these stories which theoretically could go back a very, very long time. There's a huge amount of academic discussion about how old a lot of these folklore stories are and how authentic they are, because there was a sort of Victorian scholarship was heavily involved in sort of codifying and prettying up and making coherent some of these folk tales. There's a lot of debate about how a lot of things that we are told are sort of ancient traditions are Victorian inventions. But at the same time, there does seem to be evidence that some of these stuff does go back in really complicated ways, right back to possibly the pre-Roman period. But I don't see it as reclaiming as so much as pointing out to the whole point of a lot of these folklore stories is that they're incredibly complicated. They can't be pinned down. They don't have a neat answer. They don't have that kind of neat, well, I'm right and you're wrong, because they're always open-ended. They're always complicated. And in fact, an awful lot of them always are about welcoming strangers in and inviting strangers in, and the world being a very strange place, and attempts to kind of make sense of Britain, in fact, by linking it to classical tradition. So by kind of essentially claiming, I keep thinking about this. The article I wrote in the bookseller began with this sort of wonderful story about the story of Brute the Trojan, where the story is that Britain is named after Brute the Trojan, or Brute or Brutus the Trojan, who came from Troy. So he's a refugee. And he came to Britain in a small boat from a war. Yes. And that was what Britain was named after. Yeah. And that was sort of accepted as the medieval kings of England loved this story because it allowed them to situate themselves in kind of what Bruce is not mentioned in the Iliad or the Aeneid, but he was there. Okay. Kind of he left Troy with Aeneas. So kind of this. So you can sort of link they love it because they can link their own sort of sense of being kings of England back to these classical texts. So they really celebrate this. There's all these kinds of stuff lots of stuff in Chaucer about the kings are going back to Brute the Trojan and things. And so that notion that people in Britain came from somewhere else, and that's a lot of these stories try and legitimate England or Britain by saying, because our ancestors came from somewhere else and came here. So that kind of, it's total reversal of everything we're hearing. People are sort of, it's awful stuff we're hearing at the moment.
Shows the importance of the connecting to those stories, because from what we were saying earlier about the soldiers connecting to the brutality of the world, and you're not always going to get your happy ending that way, to the kings saying, well, Britain was built on these stories and this person coming over on a boat. I mean, everyone just needs to have that sort of like legitimization in their life to feel.
It's just, I think we're
in the stories around you.
It's just having that. It is just that sort of pointing out things out. It's that really bizarre narrative of kind of native British or native English people. Yeah. And actually kind of the traditional narrative of native British and native English people is that they came from somewhere else. Well, and they guess kind of, sort of,
no one's
maybe
really
we're trying to remember that.
Time.
Maybe we're trying, just remember that. Yeah. So and it is, these so often in folklore and in myth, people change gender, they change shape, everything it's not that kind of really simple depressing binaries of male and female, right and wrong, kind of black and white, us and them. It's always incredibly complex and convoluted, and things are always changing and always shifting, and people's identity is always shifting. And again, just having that kind of pointing out how complex and nuanced and contested identity is, and people's relationships to other is. That's so much there in folklore, and it's so it's so important to kind of keep pointing out people who sort of talk about, again, sort of bang on about Englishness and Britishness. It's complicated. It's the whole those stories that they're trying to claim legitimate the sense of us as English and them as foreigners. Well, actually, those stories are incredibly complicated and full of incredibly shifting, strange, very nebulous, complex identities. And it's not a matter of us and them, it's a matter of everything shifting and changing all the time. And it's so I think it's really important just to remember those.
It's the most interesting, and I can see why as a writer you want to write in the fantasy genre in that way, because you can play with so many different elements. And the binary is not interesting or right, because it's never been the case for real life or books or stories. But yeah, so I should bring it just back to where we are at World Fantasy Con.
Yes.
And you said right at the start, so you were on the committee? You are on the committee?
Yes, I'm on there.
Just because I know you've got a lot on this weekend, do you want to just talk slightly about being in the VFS committee, or what you're next excited to do at World Fantasy Con? Because you've got lots on, so I don't want to keep you
I was on the World Fantasy Con committee, particularly involved in programming. So I was involved with coming up with a lot of the panel descriptions and things, and putting people on panels, and that was. We'll have to hope the panels work out. But
surely will.
So yes, it's amazing. I first got involved with this. I was taken along. Karen Fishwicks, who's the chair of World Fantasy Con 2025, suggested I come to World Fantasy Con in Los Angeles with her as the sort of writer who'd be linked to the bid, and we'd begin sounding out about how a British World Fantasy bid linked to the British Fantasy Society. And it's been so this has been going on since we've been working towards this since 2019.
Wow.
And then it finally is happening now, and it feels kind of quite unbelievable. It's really strange. It feels kind of weird that this is it now after all those years of planning and talking about it. And
that is exciting.
Yes. And so I was involved with some of the coming up with the panel descriptions. So I've got some. So there's really, really exciting panels I'm looking forward to listening to. But I've got in a couple of hours, in fact, I need to go and get my head together for that soon. I'm doing a panel about the radical politics of Grimdark, which will actually be an incredibly interesting panel because, as far as I know, all the panelists are females. Usually, when I do a Grimdark panel, it is usually me and some men, and we are usually talking very much about these sort of big book texts by men. And I mean, obviously, the most grimdark of my books that I tend to talk about in those panels, Empires of Dust, are, as I said, very much books about men. So it's really to be on a panel where everyone on that panel is, I think, going to be female and be talking about explicitly about Grimdark as a kind of radical. It's very much a genre about men, but kind of critiquing that whole notion of male violence and masculinity and these sort of alpha male sword and sorcery types as kind of really deeply problematic will be really interesting. Really getting into that. And then straight after that, I have a Meet the Author event, which I'm always dreading because if no one comes, if no one comes, it's kind of fine because you sort of sit there thinking, no one likes me, but you're like, no one will ever know this. I can just go off. No, we just never mention this again. But the worst is when like 2 or 3 people turn up because there's supposed to be 12. So you're in this room with 12 chairs. And then sort of 2 people sit there. So you can't sort of, it's not like no one knows. So you're sitting there like, hi, my 2 fans. Like,
what you can do is just sit on a smaller table and have a lovely chat.
Yes,
and,
so that's slightly terrifying.
Oh, no.
But then I'm on a panel on, then I have my book launch tomorrow, the Flame Tree book launch, which is going to be amazing. And I have a very special new dress for that, which it was my Christmas present from my whole family last year, which I haven't worn. I've been patiently keeping my wardrobe for a whole year.
You're always looking very stylish. Your dragon shoes. No, dragon shoes.
The dragon shoes are not. No, these shoes are. No, the dragon shoes are
very
here.
cool.
Yes, these are very cool. But
sword necklace.
Yes, sword necklace. Yes, and then I've got a panel on Saturday called Writing Fighting, which is talking about writing battles and fight scenes as a literary art. So it's talking about. I do sometimes do writing fighting as a kind of guide to people because people do get very anxious about writing fight scenes because obviously it's not something many of us have ever experienced. I mean, you often get people on the panels who say, on that kind of panel, who sort of say, they've done reenactments or they've done mixed martial arts or they've done HEMA or they've done LARPing or something. And you're like, but it's not really the same, is it? Because very, very few of us have ever been in a situation where it's kind of we're engaged in combat with someone who's trying to kill us, and also once they've killed us, they will then set fire to our house, kill our parents and our children, and
it's hard to imagine.
Yes, it's hard to imagine the stakes of that kind of thing. So the kind of people do get very, very anxious about writing that. So I've done that kind of panel, but this is going to be a panel much more about the literary art of writing. So it's not so much going to be a kind of obviously a bit of overlaps, but it's talking about the literary art of writing battle scenes and fight scenes and what they add to the book and what you do with them and what kind of... So it's actually kind of the similar panel, but in a more literary way. But that would be really fun because that's sometimes spoken about, but it's not. There are lots of panels about things like landscape in fantasy or kind of food in fantasy, but that kind of let's actually just talk about the battle scenes and the literary art of the battle scene is not something we actually talk about that much, which is kind of interesting because it's so central to fantasy, but it's always seen as slightly apart because I think people do feel slightly anxious about.
Got to sort of roughly glaze over there's a fighting scene.
Yes.
Focus on the small chats in it.
Yes, and actually, of course, what you're ending up, writing about killing someone is sort of an interesting thing. Yeah. So that, and then I'm doing a reading, which I'm going to be reading from. Actually, I'm going to be reading from either A Sword of Golden Ruin or the short story in the special edition, the new special edition of A Sword of Bronze and Ashes, which is a special short story that was put in to reward people for buying the special edition of a book they've already bought. But the prose in that was just a pure exercise in prose. It's not really got much plot, but it's just a pure exercise in just writing about the most absurdly high fantasy kind of Clark Ashton Smith style. There's actually very little plot to this, but it's just writing about just an absurdly fantastical world and using words to try and shape that. So
I think that's a good place to just let people know to go and look for the new special editions.
Yes, they are amazing. They are so beautiful.
Yeah, and obviously amazing stories inside. But yes, I feel like I should let you go and have a rest before you prepare for the next panel. But thank you very much. Is there anything you want to
just
leave anyone with?
Please buy my books. But yes, I'm in for it. Yeah, no, Flame Tree really deserve your support as well. Come buy all the Flame Tree books because they're just so beautiful.
They're beautiful
and so important. And what they're doing is, I feel really honoured to be part of the Flame Tree family.
We've got fantastic authors.
Yes,
Make it all worth it.
So beautiful. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I had a great time catching up with Anna, as well as many other authors and book lovers who were at the World Fantasy Con. If you've ever been yourself, you'll know how brilliant an experience it is, and if you haven't, I would highly recommend. There's so much to learn from fantastic writers such as Anna, and a great community of people to meet. We were also especially proud to have won the British Fantasy Award for Best Indie Press while we were there, so we can't thank everyone who supports us enough, which of course includes all of our podcast listeners. On a last note, I do want to point to Anna's stunning work. Her 2 novels, A Sword of Bronze and Ashes and A Sword of Golden Ruin, are available in absolutely beautiful hardback editions and can be found on our website or at any book retailer. You really can't miss out. Right, that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week for an episode all about fairies.
Thanks so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast and look forward to the next episode. Do recommend it to your friends. Goodbye for now.